Hey guys, tonight we start with a siren, a river, and a seal, one of those nights where your pillow becomes a map and your breath keeps time with distant alarms. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a note in the comments with your city and what time it is where you are. I love seeing our little night flotilla scattered across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You pull the blanket up and let your shoulders loosen. You hear it. The city's long, tired siren winding down. Kyiv exhales. Somewhere east, Kharkiv does the same. Downstream, the river city of Dnipro holds its breath like a swimmer at the wall. You picture the front, not as a red line on television, but as bridges watched. Crossings fortified. Islands counted by drone. You don't need me to tell you this is the present. I'm a Ukrainian archaeologist day job. Field notes, permits, and gentle negotiations with mud. Night hobby. Detective novels and tales of lost caches. Tonight, those two worlds shake hands. Your screen vibrates with mine as a message pops up. No sender ID, one attachment. A scan of a page the color of tea left out too long. Slanted handwriting. At the bottom, a wax signet stamped twice so deep the paper bruises. A falcon. 3 words beneath it. 7th, after Elijah. You sit up a little. You're right, this reads more like a church calendar than a treasure map. But that's exactly why the hook catches. In this part of the world, time has always worn 2 faces, the civil clock and the liturgical drum. Here's your mainline history morsel to hold on to while you settle in. In 1648, Bohdan Khmelnytsky led a Cossack uprising that shook the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. The Dnipro was both road and frontier, and the Zaporizhian Cossacks, the river's hard students, turned its fords and islands into an operating manual. 6 years later, in 1654, came the Pereyaslav Arrangement, sworn loyalty to Moscow, under terms so contested that historians still argue about what was promised and what was only implied. Autonomy? Taxes? Officer appointments? Ask 5 scholars? You get 7 answers. The phone buzzes again, this time from my institute. War slows almost everything, but it can't be allowed to snap the thread of heritage. The message is short. If the Falcon Seal is credible, investigate non-invasively. You and I share that very official phrase with the same small, exhausted smile. It means eyes, ears, camera, no pry bars, no heroics. You and I do the first sensible thing, homework, but with nicer lighting. You learn the names that matter now. Khortytsia, the long island that anchors half the legends. The Sich, not just a camp, but a self-governing Cossack community that elected its hetman and placed brotherhood above crowns. And the Chaika, the Cossack riverboat, shallow, fast, and rude to rapids. A quirky fact for your pocket. To move quietly at night, crews sometimes lashed bundles of reeds along the gunwales not for decoration, but to dampen splash and add a whisper of buoyancy. Think of it as the stealth mode of the 17th century. You take a breath with me, and we sketch the puzzle on the inside of your eyelids. 7th after Elijah. Elijah's feast falls in high summer. Local rivers often sit lower in the days after. When heat lingers and the wind behaves. That phrase could be a time 7 nights after the feast or a place the 7th ford in a counted sequence a quartermaster trusts more than a drawn map. Cossack logistics loved numbers, quartermasters loved redundancy, and the river, then as now, loved to be read, not commanded. We make a tiny plan that fits in the palm of your hand. Step 1. Check the seal. Wax tells on its maker, edges chip, matrices wear. If our falcon shows the same micro-wound as known examples, the scan graduates from rumor to lead. Step 2. Align the feast days with historical low-water windows. Step 3. Lay old ford names St. Nicholas Ford, Black Ford, Oaken Ford over modern satellite imagery. Step 4. Test the 7, then stop at 8, habit counting to the 7th. Then slipping one pocket farther to hide where wind and current make sightlines lazy. Step 5. Leave everything as we found it. Take only images, impressions, and notes that another tired team could reproduce. You tilt your head and ask, because you're you. What about the spooky part? The stories of lights moving against the current? I grin. Here's another odd fact. Some monastery notebooks from this stretch of river mention a light that goes against the flow. That doesn't require ghosts. Hooded lamplight on a flat boat hugging the wind shadow will look wrong to a distant watcher. Also, fish glue, once common in repairs and bindings, tightens with heat and can creak inside a narrow rock chamber. Add night air, and you get a noise like someone humming a note they've almost forgotten. Believe in acoustics. Let the romance ride along in the back seat. We set our tone for the night like you set your fan, low and steady. No breath-holding contests with fate. We'll carry a contact microphone, a red-filtered headlamp, a scanner pad, and a little putty for taking impression copies of seals if we meet any that want to be remembered. We won't dig, we won't chip. We'll listen. If there's a story to be told by the rock, it prefers to tell it as a hum. You deserve a quick map of the stakes. Conventional treasure stories promise glitter. Ours promises paper. During Khmelnytsky's rise, spoils moved coin, yes, but also ledgers, seals, drafts. In a war of shifting loyalties, documents buy time and allegiance. Imagine a clause that says the host elects its officers, or that taxation remains local for a term. Imagine how that one sentence would echo now, while a modern war tries to straighten old lines with force. If anything valuable was cached along the Dnipro, it may be a voice on paper that history tried to drown with a dam. You sit back. You let that picture settle. The river as archive, islands as file folders, caves as drawers sealed with tar. Another note to tuck into your sleeve. Tar wasn't only for hulls. It shows up on crates and planks to waterproof and to warn off curious fingers. If we touch a board that smells like a summer shipyard, we'll photograph, note the grain, take a microsample if permitted, and tuck it back to sleep. Non-invasive doesn't mean timid. It means disciplined. You ask for one more thing before we go. What exactly do historians still fight over? Fair. Beyond the headline battles, they fight over texts over which Pereyaslav clauses were agreed to in spirit, which were written later, and which are wishful thinking dressed as parchment. They argue about autonomy's shape and about what submission meant to men who elected their leaders under watchful icons. It's not pedantry. In this region, definitions turn into decisions. Decisions turn into borders. Borders turn into lives. So here's where we stand. You and I. In the quiet after the siren. A falcon that looks legitimate. A phrase that might be a time and a place. A method that values ears over shovels. We won't make a movie of it. We'll make a record. If we find a humming pocket behind stone on Khortytsia, we'll note it. If we find a plank with a tar-sweet edge and a faint impression, we'll copy it, not claim it. And if the river only offers us wind on reeds and the soft push of current, we'll take that too. Not every night delivers a note. Some nights tune you for the note that's coming. You curl a hand under your cheek. The fan keeps that patient background thrum. From here, the plan is simple enough to fall asleep to. Count the crossings, breathe at 7, hide at 8, listen. Somewhere between Kiev's siren and Kharkiv's echo, between maps and hymns, between what the Cossacks swore and what later scribes wrote down, there's a seam where sound behaves like memory. If we're gentle, the river will give us a bar or two. And if it doesn't, well, you still slept to a good story, and tomorrow we'll try the other bank. You slip your phone to night mode and let the desk lamp pretend it's a candle. Paper breathes better in warm light. So do you. The scan with the falcon seal sits on your screen like a small dare. You zoom to the rim of the impression, and there it is, a tiny crescent nick where the matrix must have worn down. The kind of flaw that turns a seal into a fingerprint. You don't celebrate. You file the feeling away. Good clues prefer quiet rooms. Beside you, Oksana glides in like a librarian who's outwalked the sirens. She lays down 2 reference impressions from known Khmelnytsky-era documents. You overlay, tilt, and see the same lunar bite at the edge. You both make the same, not quite smile that means, likely, not certain yet. You ask for context, because context is the blanket that lets you sleep. The largest shape first. In 1648, Bohdan Khmelnytsky led a Cossack uprising that cracked the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth's grip across much of Ukrainian land. Early wins at Zhovty Vody, Korsun, and Piliaptsi weren't just battlefield headlines. They were supply chain earthquakes. Armies scattered, noble treasuries moved, church relics traveled under canvas. The mainstream point to pocket. The Dnipro wasn't just scenery. It was the road, the wall, and sometimes the hiding place. You flip to the Cossack Sich, the river republic that behaved like barracks, parliament, and stubborn school all at once. Leaders, hetmans, were elected. Rules were argued under icons, and loyalty was sworn sideways to the brotherhood before it looked upward to any crown. A quirky fact for your inner trivia collector. Some Cossacks kept little wax tins good for sealing letters, patching seams, or smudging a board to make prying fingers stick. Tar did the heavier work waterproofing hulls and planks, and incidentally shouting, "Don't touch me," in a smell everyone recognized. You tilt toward the phrase that hooked us. 7th, after Elijah. Elijah's feast breathes in high summer. In the days that follow, rivers often sit low and predictable. Here's the operative idea. A double count that ties time to place. Count nights from the feast, and count fords along a practiced route. Say 7 out loud. Then actually hide at 8 one pocket farther, where wind shadows make spyglasses lazy. And yes, historians still argue whether 7th was truly coded procedure or a later storyteller's varnish. You don't take a side. You plan a test. Oksana snaps on a UV torch. The wax fluoresces in freckles, tiny specks of rosin in a beeswax blend. Era appropriate. You jot it down with the fast, careful handwriting you reserve for details you intend to double-check sober. Another odd fact. Some monasteries near the rapids bound notes with fish glue. Warmed by lamp heat in a snug niche, the glue tightens and whispers. A distant watcher hears a light sing against the current and writes poetry about it. An acoustics nerd calls it thermal contraction in a resonant cavity. Both get to keep their version. You, being you, keep both on the table and label them coexisting truths. You assemble the method like a pocket tool. Calendars first. You pin the local liturgical calendar to a water-level chart and circle likely low-water windows after Elijah. Names next. You overlay Old Ford names, St. Nicholas Ford, Black Ford, Oaken Ford on modern satellite images, allowing for the dams that drowned the famous rapids in the 20th century. When the Soviets raised reservoirs, the river forgot its shoals on purpose. You will have to remember for it. 7 then 8. You sketch a route where you count 7 but pause in the 8th pocket. The one a quartermaster would trust, and a pursuer would miss. Listen, not pry. You pack a contact microphone, a red-filtered headlamp, a scanner pad, and a thumb of impression putty. No metal detectors, no chisels. You'll take images, imprints, and sound. You'll leave rock, wood, and water. 4-beat choreography. Lift, scan, note, return. You drill it until your hands can do it sleepy. This isn't high cinema. It's conservation tai chi. You both need a sip of something. The Institute's vending machine dispenses tea that tastes like advice. You drink the advice anyway. On a scrap, you make a small glossary for the night audience you're carrying with you. Chaika Cossack riverboat. Shallow draft. Fast. Rude to rapids. Occasionally shoulder-portaged around angry water. Sich Cossack community. Fort. Elected command. Rough order. A democracy that carried spears to meetings. Pereyaslav, 1654. The arrangement with Moscow that everyone quotes and nobody agrees on. Autonomy? Taxes? Appointments? Scholars still debate the clauses, the intent, and the versions. The siren beyond the windows hiccups, pauses, goes quiet. You and Oksana don't flinch anymore. You both note the gap and return to the page. You ask, "What about the name in the corner, Vasil?" She taps a register. A scribe's hand we see elsewhere, she says. Not proof, but the right kind of neighbor. You nod. Puzzle pieces like to cluster in families. You still owe your future self a few low-key fun facts to tuck into narration later. Monks sometimes dyed inks with onion skins, which age to a distinct warm brown. Island fishermen check drift by tossing millet and watching which way the seeds settle. Foam lies. Grain tells the truth. And river guides teach that reflections themselves are gauges stretched shadows for fast flow, velvet shadows for lull. A trick as old as the first human who squinted at water and said, left. The plan coalesces into a mercy of bullet points. Tonight, hallway drills only. You tape an X on the floor, pretend it's a rock lip, and practice the 4 beats: lift, scan, note, return until your muscles remember them better than your mind. Before dawn, a quiet reconnaissance on Khortytsia. No heroics. You grid a few shore segments and run acoustic tests. Solid is nothing. Hollow is something. Hum is a promise to come back with calmer hands. Low water window. A river run to test the 7 then 8 habit in real water, with wind shadows and reed alleys doing their secret, generous work. Documentation discipline. If you meet tar, you photograph. If you meet wax, you impress. If you meet a sealed cavity with air like a held breath, you listen twice and label it, then go home intact. You let yourself enjoy one small, gentle joke. You label the practice scans. Do not be interesting. The best first night data often looks boring. The river rarely sings for strangers on command. It prefers to tune your ears so that when it does hum, you're not busy congratulating yourself. Oksana pulls a folded list from a side pocket. Bridge closures, island patrol windows, power surge hours when the district flickers and upload speeds die. War turns logistics into weather. You prepare the way you would for rain by assuming you will get wet. You add a dead man upload. If your app doesn't hear from you by a set time after the river run, it releases the seal scans to 3 safe inboxes. Paperwork isn't drama, but in this job, it's armor. Before you close the folder, you give yourself a final lullaby of context. The reason this matters is not glitter, it's grammar. If the Cossack host once wrote, or almost wrote, that officers were to be elected, that tithes stayed local for a term, that autonomy had teeth, then that grammar challenges defaults that hardened later. A document doesn't change a map by itself, but it changes how generations teach the map, and sometimes that's where borders truly move. You stretch your hand, switch the lamp to lower, and set a timer. 15 minutes of hallway rehearsal turns into 30. You and Oksana drift through the motions like a duet that refuses to hurry. Lift, scan, note, return. You say the words out loud once, then stop saying them at all. Your shoulders learn the weight of the scanner pad. Your thumbs learn exactly how much pressure the putty likes. Your inner metronome learns the rhythm of doing important things quietly. When the timer ticks, you pack. The kit fits small because your ego does too. You glance at the falcon again before you shut the case. The little crescent nick winks like an old scar that remembers the fight but doesn't brag about it. You are almost out the door when you remember to ask the question you always ask on nights like this, for the sake of the recording and your own nerves. What if we find nothing? Oksana slips her scarf back on like a rank she earned. Then we keep the method, she says. And the method keeps us. That answer is good enough to sleep on. You step into the stairwell, where the concrete smells faintly of dust and soap, and you breathe until your heart keeps pace with the fan at home. You aren't racing the river, you're learning its pace. Dawn will want you punctual. You clear a patch of floor and turn tape into a river. Islands become sticky notes. It's homemade cartography, the kind that smells faintly of coffee and ambition. You number the fords with a marker, 1 to 7, then add a small dot just beyond, 8. That dot is the wink no one admits to. Count 7, hide at 8. Simple enough to remember, tricky enough to matter. If you've read And Quiet Flows the Dawn, you already have a picture in your head. Cossacks as stubbornly free, allergic to being told where to stand. Different river, different hosts, but the posture rhymes. On the Dnipro, that attitude traveled by Chaika, Those shallow boats that skimmed rapids and, when rapids got uppity, were shoulder-portaged around them like furniture with pride issues. Quartermasters weren't poets. They were clockmakers. They stitched time to place, so a route could survive a flood or a scribe with loose lips. You practice the double count the way a musician runs scales. First, time. Elijah's feast sits in high summer. 7 nights after often brings low, obedient water. Second, space. A trusted chain of fords. St. Nicholas. Black. Oaken names that hang on even after dams drown the shoals that inspired them. Say 7 out loud where anyone listening expects a stop, then slip 1 pocket farther where wind shadows make binoculars sleepy. Was that really how they did it? Historians still argue code or coincidence, method or folk memory. You're not here to win the argument. You're here to see if the river answers to the rhythm. You set up a small choir of tools. The contact mic goes in the front pouch. The red headlamp gets a fresh battery. The scanner pad slides into a dry bag. A thumb of impression putty waits in a tin. No metal detector, that's a legal and ethical minefield. And besides, magnets don't know when to shut up. Your choreography is 4 beats long. Lift, scan, note return. You drill it until your hands move without your mouth narrating. To keep things human, and because you promised 1 weird fact per night, you jot a river trick on a sticky note. Fishermen, toss millet. To read drift, foam lies. Grain. Another one. Some crews lashed reed bundles along a hull to muffle slap and add a whisper of buoyancy. 17th century stealth mode isn't black paint. It's grass and patience. You talk yourself through the story you'll tell the audience later, while keeping the tone light enough to sleep by. The Sich wasn't a mythic hideout. It was a working town with a temper. Elected hetman. Arguments under icons. Rules that knew the difference between being safe and being silent. The big picture knowledge you keep plain. The uprising of 1648 cracked the Commonwealth's hold. The Pereyaslav arrangement of 1654 bound the host to Moscow under terms still fought over in classrooms and comment sections. Taxes? Officer appointments? The word autonomy? Each version of the text shades them differently. That's why paper can be a more dangerous treasure than coin. You tape a string across the room to stand in for wind. Stand in front of the string, and reflections. Flow. Stand behind it, and reflections go velvety. On the water, you'll read the same. Stretched shadows mean fast water. Soft shadows mean a lull. And lulls make good pockets. You add a tiny metronome of knocks to your kit. 2 knuckles on the oar shaft. Then 1. Hard soft means pull back. Hum pause means we're close. Angle change. No chatting on the water if you can help it. The wind loves gossip. Because you promised a Cossack aside that isn't lectury. Most images of Cossacks in your head probably involve horses, sabers, and that single lock of hair, ozeledits, braided with attitude. Keep that picture, but set it on water. Trade hooves for oars, trade dust for mist. The temperament stays. If you point and say, stop at 7, a certain kind of Cossack will grin and stop at 8 out of principle. One more thing to lodge in the back of your mind before dawn. The Dnipro's famous rapids. The ones with theatrical nicknames are mostly sleeping under reservoirs now. The map didn't vanish. It just went quiet. That's why you're leaning so hard on acoustics. Rock with air behind it answers differently. It doesn't boom like a drum. It holds a note, like someone remembering a hymn. Oksana texts a last-minute update. Patrol windows, bridge closures, a patch where the power grid likes to blink at midnight. You fold the list into your sleeve. War makes timing a second river that runs over the first. You'll steer both. You look at the tape river one more time. It's messy and honest. You peel up the 7, stick it back down, then draw the tiniest dot just beyond. The dot is your secret handshake with a past that liked to play fair without being obvious. When you finally turn off the lamp, the fan keeps the faintest apartment-sized hum. You count it out 1, 2, 3, 4, and picture the real water answering. If the method is sound, the river won't need to be kind. It will just need to be itself. Tomorrow, you carry that dot onto the actual current. Dawn comes iron gray and quiet enough to hear your own zipper. You tuck the thermos under your arm and follow the boardwalk until the wood turns slick and the reeds begin to whisper. A man in a weathered jacket lifts the stern of a small boat with the ease of habit. This is Mykola, retired diver, part-time fisherman, full-time river sense. He nods once, the way river people say, "Morning." Without losing heat. You pass gear down, contact mic, red headlamp, measuring tape, scanner pad in a dry bag, a small tin of impression putty. Envelopes that won't poison old paper. Low water shows Cortizia's ribs, granite shoulders combed by wind, ledges pocked like old bread. A quick anchor of context for your inner map. The island sits at the historical heart of the Zaporizhian world. Early Sich encampments rose and moved here and on nearby islets. Later, the Dnipro HES dam drowned the famous rapids under reservoirs, muffling their theater, but not erasing their logic. The river got quieter, the geometry stayed. Historians still argue whether the first Sich was on Cortizia proper, Tomakivka, or farther at Bazavluk. You keep that debate in your pocket and concentrate on what you can test. We don't touch the obvious coves. We start with a grid, chalk X's on dry rock, pencil hash marks on a damp notebook, a rhythm that makes you feel like you're sweeping a stage no one's allowed to dance on. Mykola points to a corner where the wind curls back. Sound holds there. You press the contact mic to stone, and I tap the oar shaft. Light. Firm. Light. Solid. Solid. Wait. The third tap stretches a held hum, not theatrical. Just slightly warmer than silence. You and I share a look that says, not treasure, not yet air plus structure. We circle and try the same face from a different angle. Dawn carries sound. Oddly, temperature layers turn the river into a soft trumpet. First tap, hum. Second tap, hum deeper. Third, nothing at all. As if a hand inside the rock just pressed pause. You shade the square darker and write suspected cavity with a question mark you hope to erase later. On a patch of exposed mud you find a blackened edge of wood. It smells faintly of summer shipyard's tar, not romance. We don't pocket it. You photograph grain and scar, note location, and nestle it back. For your nightly weird fact quota, some old boatyard stuffed seams with moss before sealing with tar, it swelled to waterproof and damped sound. Another trick. Pilots used willow twigs as feelers when light lied. Twigs tell current through the hand better than eyes do through glare. We read the water like a low-effort poem. Stretched reflections mean faster current. Velvet reflections mean a lull. Lulls make decent pockets. Mykola stands the oar briefly like a wind vane. When it stops spinning, the blade points neatly into the throat of flow. You mark an arrow on your map. This is less Sherlock and more sweeping a library for the right shelf. Second grid. Second hum lower now. Like your fan set to sleep. A fisherman on the far bank lowers a net and gives a small wave. River etiquette is a two-step. I see you, you see me, we both pretend we didn't. You add a soft line in your notebook. Hum. B flattish. No need to be right. We're after consistency, not pitch. Mainstream note to keep the history muscle warm. The Cossack Chaika boats could carry 50-odd men when needed. But their genius was shallow. Draft drag around rapids, shoulder portage across gravel tongues, slip into reed alleys where cavalry dreams couldn't follow. That's why maps and body memory share a page in their notebooks. You hear that attitude now, in the way Mykola refuses the straight line, in favor of the quiet one. We rest on a granite lip, while weak sun tries the water on. Mykola pours tea that tastes like iron and stubbornness. You sip because refusing hospitality is bad fieldcraft. A small curiosity to tuck away. The scratches on some old stones are not art or vandalism. They're water gauges, chiseled and re-chiseled by hands that needed numbers more than views. When you run a finger over them, you're touching somebody's century. Third grid. 2 taps flat, the third opens into a throatier hum. You mark it and add tar 1 when the air brings you a second, cleaner whiff of pitch from the same seam. Not a claim, just a smell with a name. I ease the oar tip into a narrow crack and withdraw it with a thread of cold scent clinging. Mykola nods. Old material. You store the phrase under maybe later. We keep the no-drama routine. No probes, no prying. Just sound, light, and restraint. A gull laughs like a critic. The island does not. We follow wind shadows south and stitch your shaded squares into a dotted line. It bends in a lazy S that slips behind the 7th nominal crossing and settles where else into what a quartermaster would have called the 8th pocket. You close the notebook and breathe out an inch taller. A plan that felt like folklore now has 3 little anchors you can return to by ear. On the walk back, you palm the bark of an old oak simply to borrow some of its patience. The local stories call certain giants Cossack oaks. Tree ages invite bravado. Dendrochronology invites humility. Either way, the bark holds more arguments than we do. At the slipway, we strip the kit and count it back in. Mic, pad, putty, tape, envelopes. Mykola says 2 words. Less wind. That's a forecast and a blessing. Less wind means clearer echoes and also more careful feet. You pocket the chalk nub like a coin and look at me with an expression that's half student, half conspirator. Tonight, you whisper to yourself, we count to 7 and don't stop. We listen where a straight thinker would rest. If the rock answers again, same hum, same angle, you'll upgrade the question mark to a dot, not an exclamation point. Not yet. On the bus home, the city yawns awake around you. You replay the taps in your head. Light, firm, light hum, hush. Your shoulders mimic the 4-beat motion, lift, scan, note, return until muscle remembers what nerves might forget in the dark. By noon, the sun finds even the low corners of the island. You put your notebook under your pillow for an hour, the way some people sleep with novels. It's not superstition. It's rehearsal. The river will expect you on time. Night folds over the island like a soft coat you don't mind sharing. You set the red headlamp to its faintest heartbeat and check the kit like a bedtime ritual. Contact mic, scanner pad, putty, pencils that won't run when damp. Mykola pushes off with 2 small strokes that sound like promises. You count crossings under your breath the way kids count sheep. 1. A shallow that glints and pretends not to. 2. A willow's wind shadow, dark as good tea. 3. The lee of a stone shoulder. 4. A narrow between reeds that says hush. 5. A braided tongue of current that doesn't mind visitors. 6. The sort of seam you only see once someone tells you only. You mouth 7 and don't stop. The boat noses into an inlet 1 pocket farther, your quiet 8. You and Mykola breathe as if auditioning for the river's choir. Steady, low, uninteresting. You clip the mic, tap the oar shaft, hard, soft. Rock answers with patience. Then the 3rd tap warms into a small, sure hum. Not a song. More like the fan in your room when it remembers its job. A white moth of light lifts over the reeds, then 2. Not stars, drones. Consumer frames. Clever rotors. That eager whine. They sweep a cone across the water and stall exactly where a textbook would stop. The 7th pocket. You let them be right in the wrong place. Mykola angles our boat half a meter deeper into the shadow, and your shoulders loosen a fraction. War has a way of training everyone to look at the headline. You've brought a footnote. You press the mic to stone, tap again, lower this time. Hum pause. Your agreed signal for close, change angle. You shift the nose of the boat by inches, and the hum steadies like a held breath. A smell drifts up that isn't romance. Tar. Faint and honest. You don't smile. You make a box on the page and write Tar 2 with a pencil that has seen worse weather. Mykola slides a hooked pole along the lip until metal whispers on something round. A tiny vibration travels through wood into your palms, the clean ring of iron touched politely. You could pull. You do not. You look, listen, write. 4 beats. Lift, scan, note, return. Tonight you only borrow the note. History keeps you company while you wait out the drones. A gentle mainline thought. Long after the uprising, in 1775, Catherine II ordered the destruction of the Zaporizhian Sich. The wooden councils went to ash. Some Cossacks took service elsewhere. Some drifted down to form the Danube Sich under Ottoman eyes. Rivers change flags. Boats learn new mouths of old songs. When people ask, where did the treasure go? One answer is prosaic. Everywhere. Soldiers get paid. Communities relocate. Ledgers do what ledgers do. Travel in pockets and disguised crates. And yes, historians still debate whether the blow to the Sich was inevitable centralization or preventable panic. The drones blink and sulk off, bored by your refusal to be cinematic. You reward them by staying boring. A quirky fact to pass the minute. The Dnipro's Wells catfish can grow so large that night fishermen swear they nudge a hull like a neighbor asking for sugar. If your boat sighs unexpectedly, it might be biology saying, hello, not myth. You try a scan on a reachable board grain running like a shallow river inside wood. No seal tonight, just texture and pitch. You press the pad, record the fibers, and tuck the board back exactly where it lived. The smell of beeswax doesn't show. Not everything wants to match the story. Angle? You breathe. Mykola tilts the bow a finger's width. You ease the hook down and touch iron again. Higher up, maybe a ring set long ago to lever a plank, maybe just a survivor from a century of repairs. The important thing isn't the noun, it's the place, the way sound behaves here, repeatable and calm. You add one more breadcrumb to your guidebook voiceover, the kind that makes listeners nod in the dark. If you've read And Quiet Flows the Dawn, you've already met the Cossack mood, free-leaning, stubborn, allergic to tidy orders. Put that posture in a boat instead of a saddle, and you get logistics with personality. Say, stop at 7, and the answer comes back as a grin and a detour to 8. The river asks for a decision. You have proof of place, hum, tar, iron. You don't have proof of story, no seal, no text. You choose method over theater. You take one more scan, write one more arrow, and let the inlet keep its dignity. A map of sounds is still a map. On the slow drift out, you keep the sleep-grade history thread going. Just enough to anchor. The Chaika's shallow draft made land-water hybrids of its crews. Rowers who were ready to shoulder the boat over gravel tongues and smile about it later. The design pedigree? Historians still argue whether the boat's profile borrowed more from steppe neighbors or grew strictly local. Either way, it solved the river like a riddle told by wind. Past the reeds, the main current lifts you like a patient hand. City light returns as a smear, not a mandate. You inventory the kit by touch. Mic, pad, putty, notes. Back on the slip, Mykola says, window again at 2:40. You nod. The phrase 7th after Elijah has stopped being mysterious and started being a schedule. You can work with a schedule. You stow the boat, sling the bag, and let your knees remember floorboards. On the way home, you rehearse the 4 beats without moving. Lift, scan, note, return. Your hands twitch minutely at the return, as if the rock could feel manners. In your head, you place a small, precise dot next to the word 8. If the river wants to upgrade that dot to a line tomorrow, you'll be on time to hold the other end. You spend the afternoon where stories wear black robes. A riverside sket keeps bees in silence. A small bell lists lazily above reeds. Brother Ilarion meets you with tea the color of old brass and a smile that says he has heard every rumor twice and kept only the useful half. You walk the garden paths and trade soft questions. He asks nothing about coordinates. You ask nothing about keys. Instead, you talk tools. You show him your contact mic. He shows you a box of beeswax pillars poured last winter. Wax remembers, he says, pressing a thumb into one. So do rivers. Here's a mainstream fact to anchor the scene. The Zaporizhian host kept close to orthodoxy. Priests traveled with regiments. Icons went into battle. Monasteries along the Dnipro copied chronicles when courts were busy with sieges. Faith wasn't window dressing. It was the calendar, the drum, the oath table. That's why feast days like Elijah still whisper logistics if you're willing to listen. Ilarion hums a psalm under his breath as he watches you test drafts with a candle near a stone wall. You're not doing magic, you're doing airflow. The flame leans, then stands, then leans again. Cavities breathe, you say. He nods, amused. So do men who carry secrets. So, because you promised yourself one odd pebble each night. In lean years, some rural churches tempered beeswax with a little tallow, which changes both smell and drip behavior. A practiced eye can tell the recipe from the way a cooled drip curls. That matters if you ever find wax traces on timber. An unromantic nose can date what a romantic heart might only bless. You turn the conversation to the Harekter Nike those Cossacks legend paints as witch soldiers who could charm bullets and walk dry through storms. Ilarion laughs gently, not unkind. Boys need heroes, he says. Men need methods. You file that under still debated. Some historians argue Harekter Nike were simply elite scouts, with fieldcraft, herbal lore, and discipline. Others defend a blurred edge where ritual gave courage shape. You split the difference in your notes. Ritual can be a metronome, even when the power sits in the timing, not the words. He walks you to a shed that smells of resin and quiet. Shelves hold rosin, pitch, lampblack, the practical trinity. He lifts a pine knot and says, "This, crushed and warmed, seals a boat." The same hand that pours a candle can seal a crate. That's the line you were hoping to hear. Wax isn't romance in this story. It's a work fluid. Tar isn't mood. It's a membrane. Prayer, often as not, is a schedule: 2 psalms to cross the ford, 1 psalm to count a layover, an antiphon to sink oars without shouting. He lets you read a crumb of a monk's notebook, no dates, just routine. At night a light moved where river moves not. You don't force a ghost. You picture a hooded lamp on a flat boat hugging a wind shadow. You picture fish glue in a narrow niche, tightening with heat and whispering like someone almost singing. You picture a watcher doing what watchers do, turning physics into poetry, because it's dark, and poetry is kind. You leave the sket with 3 gifts you didn't expect. A thumb-sized wax test candle. A strip of pitch-stained linen, for your nose to remember. And a line Ilarion offers like a benediction. If you must take something, take only what can be copied. You promise, because that's your whole plan. Back at the slip, evening slides in like a careful hand. You and Mikola rehearse your silent code once more. Hard, hard, soft. Back out. Hum, pause. Close. Change angle. 3 light taps. Scan. You tuck the test candle in a pocket where your heart can feel its weight. Not symbolism. Draft meter. You row slow, learning the day's new wind. Reeds make zipper sounds and then stop when the water asks them to. At the first inlet, you resist every urge to be interesting. You place the candle on a flat stone, shield it with your palm, and watch. The flame stands small and straight. No draft. You move, just a boat's width, and try again. This time the flame threads itself sideways, and the smoke does a thin, private dance. You mark the breath line and grin in the dark. Physics is generous when you're polite. You tap the oar shaft and hear that held hum you've started to trust. Mykola angles the bow a thumb's width. You press your palm to the stone cold, slightly damp, and catch a smear of tar on a fingertip. Not a lot. Enough to put in a box labeled consistent. You don't scrape. You don't pry. You write a small word that means more than it sounds. Repeatable. The second inlet teaches a different lesson. Silence where your notes predicted voice. You sit with it. Water levels change. Pockets go to sleep and wake again. Mykola points to a line of velvet reflection farther in, and you drift there without a sound. Tap. Hum. The map corrects itself, the way a memory does when you see an old street in new light. For your audience of night readers, you tuck a little Cossack aside in the back of your story. If you've read "And Quiet Flows the Dawn," keep that sense of stubborn freedom, but swap horses for oars. The posture matches. Tell a man who loves liberty to stop at 7. And if he trusts you, he'll smile and stop at 8, just to make sure it's his choice. One last history bead for tonight's string. In the long coda after the uprising, some Cossack groups drifted to the Danube, forming a new Sich under Ottoman oversight. Others folded into imperial service. The river carried them all, because that's what rivers do. Scholars still debate whether those migrations diluted the old discipline or preserved it in different uniforms. You let the question stay open. You're busy with a smaller one that fits your boat. You finish the circuit without theatrical fines and feel the clean satisfaction of a boring page done right. Back on shore, you wrap the test candle in linen like a patient and label it Draft 1. It smells faintly of bees and work. Ilarian's line hums in your head as you shoulder the bag. Take only what can be copied. You add a quiet amendment for yourself. And only what can be repeated. Tomorrow night, you plan to ask for a different gift. Not wax, not tar words. If the river gives even a fragment of a plank with a mark, you'll be ready to take its impression and let the original sleep. For now, you put the notebook under your pillow again. Habit, not magic. And let the fan's steady voice rhyme with the stones. You drift toward sleep practicing the smallest, most disciplined hope. Lift, scan, note, return. The river keeps time. You keep promises. You time your breath to the fan and the river both. Low water window again. Same grid. Same boat. Same promise to be boring. Mykola rows like he's moving a heavy story gently. Oksana rides bow with the scanner pad zipped in a dry bag like a sleeping cat. You count crossings like steps on a dark staircase. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whisper 7, and slide into 8. The inlet wears the night a shade deeper than the rest. You place the contact mic. Tap hard, hard, soft. Rock gives you patience, then that now familiar held hum. Your shoulders drop a notch. Points on a map only earn their names if they repeat themselves. There's the smell again. Tar, faint and sensible. You don't chase it, you log it. Oksana tests a draft candle on a flat stone. The flame leans, breathes, and settles the kind of dance that tells you air has a hallway you can't see. Mykola nods once. He doesn't need adjectives. He has current. You slide the hooked pole under the rock lip and feel iron say hello, just a brush. Just enough to find a ring. A slow, careful lever opens the mouth, the width of a palm. Water makes a throat sound. Your heart tries to type in all caps. You tell it to use lowercase. A board lives there, tar-stained, edged like something someone wanted dry for longer than an hour. You don't yank. You cup lift, breathe. One corner rises into night air. Not far, just far enough for light at an angle, and the scanner to earn its keep. Grain first, parallel, tight. A little ripple, where the tree made a decision decades before it was a plank. Then Oksana whispers, hold. Under the grime, and pitch, where a hand once pressed too firmly. A faint ellipse catches red light. Inside it, not bold, Not theatrical, just there, the ghost of a falcon. Beaded border in 2 sections. A tiny crescent nick on the rim where your earlier reference impressions have the same wound. You don't call it proof. You call it family resemblance. No rubbing on wax. No impressions on top of impressions. You stick to what a conservator would bless. Macro photos, raking light, a scale and frame. Oksana takes a scan of the negative around the mark. The slight depression. The seal left in wood fibers where heat kissed grain. It's like tracing a footstep by feeling the grass bend back up. Mainline fact to anchor your hands. Khmelnytsky's chancellery used falcon signets on orders, receipts, and some military correspondence. Seals traveled with officers, matrices wore down, edges nicked. The wear pattern is a history of use, not a romance of kings. If you find a falcon, it might mean leadership. Or it might mean a practical clerk named Vasil, doing his job with a warm ring and cold tea. A quirky truth while you hold the board steady. Beeswax shrinks a little as it cools. Overpress a hot seal, lift too soon, and you get a micro offset on double stamping, the kind of ghost ring you can photograph, but not see from straight on. You catch exactly such a whisper of a second edge and nearly smile. Your inner nerd high-fives your outer patience. Something else catches the light behind the board, nothing bold, just texture that isn't wood. Linen? The edge of an oilcloth-wrapped bundle? You angle the headlamp to a sliver and earn a whisper of weave. You do not go fishing. You take your pictures and close the mouth to the width it had when you arrived. 4 beats. Lift, scan, note, return. The ritual keeps your hands from doing something the river would not forgive. You record your river facts the way bedtime needs them. Small, calm, cumulative. Stretched reflections mean faster water. Velvet reflections mean pockets. Hum means air behind stone. Tar means someone cared for dryness. Falcon means a desk once had a ring on it and a job to do. None of these alone are treasure. Together, they begin to spell procedure. You add tonight's still debated line to your mental footnotes. Historians haven't settled whether the Cossacks ran organized caches as policy or whether scattered personal stashes later braided into legend. You're not picking a side. You're picking a method. This spot behaves like a place meant to be remembered by people who counted fords and knights. Not just by a lucky rumor. Oksana seals the scans in an envelope that won't mourn humidity. Mykola lowers the board, as if putting a child back to sleep. You take a final sweep with the candle. Draft lines trace the outline of a cavity large enough for a chest corner? A bundle of documents? Your work is to leave that as a clean maybe. On the drift out, you keep the tone warm enough to doze to, for the sake of the listeners in your head. If you know, and quiet flows. The dawn, keep the Cossack spine, and set it on water. Freedom looks similar sitting on a thwart. Tell a free mind to stop at 7, and the polite answer is 8 with a wink. The city returns as watercolored light. You count the kit back in by touch. Mic, pad, putty, candle, notes. The page with the falcon photos makes your thumb shake exactly once. You let it, then stop it. What did you actually get? A marked plank, repeatable sound, tar, draft, a hint of linen, and images you could put in front of a skeptical colleague without apologizing. That's not a jackpot. That's direction. Enough to pivot your expectation from gold to paper to lists, routes, clauses that change how families remember themselves. On shore, you label tonight's packet HUM8, Falcon 1. You set a quiet dead man timer on your phone. If you don't cancel by dawn, the best scans forward to 3 safe addresses, not drama, just insurance. A gull heckles the dawn. Mykola shrugs. Oksana pockets her gloves and says, like she's grading a test she wanted you to pass. Repeatable. You nod. The word is better than applause. You head home with an honest fatigue and a small, luminous thought. The most valuable treasure a river can keep is sometimes grammar. If there's a sentence behind that board that says what people argued it said, or quietly contradicts them, the map in 1,000 minds will tilt by a degree you can feel under your feet. For now, you sleep to the fan. Your wrists replay the 4 beats as you drift. The river hums the 5th. You wake to a river that's decided to be glass. Good for reflections, risky for secrets. Oksana hands you a short list in the handwriting she uses when stakes are high and caffeine is low. Patrol window. Checkpoint name. Upload fallback. Mykola raises an eyebrow like a question you're meant to answer later. You carry last night's scans in a dry bag against your ribs and one new prop in your pack. A decoy plank tarred edge, faint ring pressed from a replica seal Oksana carved from resin. It has 2 intentional flaws a tired expert will catch and a confident amateur will miss. You're not trying to fool the river. You're trying to feed impatience. The ramp wears a uniform this morning. A clean jacket with a tidy smile blocks the slip. Radchenko, the kind of officer who treats permits as invitations to negotiate. He asks for your route and your media. You give him weather and a half-joke. He gives you a sticker on his phone case, a hawk. Not a confession, just a brand. You both know the boats with matching stickers tend to arrive when light is convenient and witnesses are not. Mainline anchor, while your hands stay calm. The Hague Convention, 1954, asks warring states to protect cultural property. The rule is simple enough to fit on a spoon. First, do no harm. Your version, field-sized. Take what can be copied, leave what cannot. And don't make a site more famous than safe. You push off at last light. Drones wake like curious moths. Same route, same count. 1 through 6, whispered into your sleeve. 7 mouthed, but not honored. 8 entered, like a chapel. Quiet, on purpose. You work the 4 beats with the tenderness of someone fixing a library spine. Lift, scan, note, return. The hum answers roll call. The tar says hello like an old cologne. A second boat ghosts the reed edge. No siren, no shout. A gray hull, with men who practice not being noisy. The leader stands with the balance of someone who grew up on deck Sokolov, maybe. Or maybe that's just what you've decided to call the type. He gestures low. Parley. You keep your voice the same volume you use when you read comments after midnight. Busy water. Busy water. He glances past you toward the 7th pocket, where a drone lingers like a cat who has found a warm laptop. He smiles without teeth. You're looking in the wrong place. Probably, you say. We're dull that way. You show empty palms and lift the decoy plank just enough to be visible. Tar edge, faint falcon. A seal that would pass a bedtime story and fail a daylight seminar. Sokolov gestures for a closer look. You don't hand it over yet. Trade, you say gently. 5 minutes with your lights off. You can go be right at 7 while we go be quiet at 8. No one touches anything. He's not new, so he doesn't take the first deal. He asks for your hard drive like a man ordering dessert first. You offer nothing and time instead. Time is the only currency everyone spends. The gray hull drifts, considering. Oksana fixes a loose strap with the patience of a person waiting out weather. Mykola stares at ripples the way some people read faces. Finally, Sokolov nods once. 5, he says. Lights dim. Drones slide toward 7 with performative curiosity. You put the decoy where it can be found on purpose. Oksana marks the spot in the log as theater and underlines it twice, because comedy is also documentation. You don't touch the real board. You don't widen the mouth. You take 2 more raking light photos of the Falcon's depression and a short contact mic sweep to prove to your future self that you didn't dream the hum. 4 beats, then back out. Manners intact. A quick, quirky fact to sweeten the edge of the scene. Beeswax traps pollen. Under a microscope, those grains can tell you season and sometimes region. If you ever lift a legitimate wax fleck, you're holding a tiny calendar that still has dust in its hair. Not tonight. Tonight you leave the dust where it belongs. Sokolov's boat noses toward 7. A drone dips, triumphant in the way gadgets get when they think they've solved you. You and Mykola slide away without silhouette. You don't feel clever. You feel punctual. That's enough. On the far side of the island, The checkpoint's shadow stretches across the water like tape you don't want to step on. The upload grid coughs once, then breathes. Oksana thumbs the dead man release to a tighter window. If you don't cancel by dawn, the best images sprint to 3 boring addresses that add to each other like a math problem you can trust. Boring is bulletproof. Mainline history note for your pillow. After the Sich fell in 1775, some Cossacks migrated to the Danube, others into imperial ranks, and the river kept its habit of turning soldiers into neighbors, then into stories. Whether Khmelnytsky meant Pereyaslav as a temporary tactic or a permanent knot is still argued in classrooms and kitchens. Still debated, in other words, because texts travel and politics edits. You idle under a dull bridge while a patrol passes and practice explaining heritage work to yourself the way you would to a friend who only clicks on shiny thumbnails. The first artifact is trust. The second is time. You can't publish a site into danger and call it victory. You can't hoard data and call it care. You aim for the narrow channel in between, where copies protect originals, and secrets have expiration dates instead of locks. The gray hull doesn't follow. Maybe your decoy is enough to keep them busy for one night. Maybe Radchenko's sticker buys them a longer window elsewhere. You don't try to solve their math. You solve yours. Catalog, rename, back up, breathe. A small kindness of a fact before bed. River birds, reed warblers tend to sleep facing the wind. It keeps their feathers tidy and lets them feel weather in their bones. You like the idea enough to borrow it. Face the wind. Sleep ready. You get home with almost nothing new to show a stranger and everything you wanted to keep. Your scans. Your method. Your promise to the rock. The decoy plank smells like theater and dries in a corner like a prop after a school play. Tomorrow it will be junk again. Tonight it bought you 5 minutes, which is an hour in river time. You label the day's folder Hum 8, FALCON 1, Theater 7, and set the phone by the fan. The hum in your room and the hum in the stone are close enough cousins to sit together on the same bench. If the river is kind, your next 5 minutes will be words. You wake to a river 1 notch lower and a reed bed littered with yesterday's guesses. Mikola spots it first, a dark bundle snagged in the stems like a fish that changed its mind. Oilcloth, tied with old wire, the size of a loaf and exactly twice as heavy as you want bedtime to be. Rules first. You bag the bundle wet. No shaking, no victory noises. Back at the institute, you prep the humidification tent 2 trays, clean mesh, distilled patience. Oksana lays out blotting paper and a camera cradle. The room smells like linen, dust, and somebody else's afternoon from 165. Samithi. You clip the wire, peel back the oilcloth, and meet rag paper fibers visible, edges furred. A wax seal once rode the first page. Now it's mostly a depression with a wax ghost around it. But the falcon is legible enough to recognize the family. You don't press it. You light it raking, photograph it macro, tuck a scale in frame like a bookmark that got a job. Lines appear, then sentences. Not the glowing certainty of a myth finally deciding to behave more like a clerk doing his job neatly on a hot day. The host shall elect its officers in assembly. The levies and tithes of the lands shall for a term remain local and be accounted through the host. The Metropolitan of Kiev shall be consulted in ecclesiastical appointments within the host's lands. Not canon, not gospel. A draft you can tell by the corrections in a second hand, and by a margin note that says simply, later. Your ribs remember to breathe. Mainstream anchor while your pulse stops performing. After Pereyaslav, 1654. Multiple articles, circulated some with teeth, some with gums, some with smiles that meant, we'll see. What counted where depended on who copied, who carried, and who needed which story told at which table. Historians still debate which texts governed practice versus posture. Your pages don't settle that fight. They add a voice, a soft, quirky fact to keep the tone human. 17th century rag paper often carries watermarks. Tiny wire designs in the mold. You tip a sheet to the lamp and there it is, barely. Something like a grape cluster. Watermarks can point to a mill, sometimes even to a season. If you ever needed proof that paper is a place, not just a surface, here you are. You and Oksana work the 4-beat you taught your hands. Lift, scan, note, return. Every page gets a macro set, a flat set, a UV glance. You resist reading out loud, but a few phrases sneak past the gate and settle like pebbles. Customs not to be altered without counsel. Forts to be manned by the host. Envoys to be received with banners, ceremony and logistics sharing a bench, like they always do on this river. You set the dead man timer tighter. If you don't cancel by dawn, the best images will sprint to 3 tedious addresses that never post selfies. Boring is armor. Mykola leans in just enough to count your breaths. Words, he says, as if you'd hauled up a net of them. You nod. The shift happens in your head without trumpets. The treasure you're hunting is not coin. It's grammar. If a generation can say we elected without flinching, because some draft once said so with ink and intention, the floor under a lot of talk changes. You take 5 minutes for the sanity loop, explain it to the sleepy audience in your head. The sitch wasn't a romance. It was a working republic, with a temper. If you've read And Quiet Flows the Dawn, keep that Cossack need to steer his own horse now, swap horse for oar and field for assembly. The phrases here echo that posture. Community first, crown later. The debate over how long that posture survived after 1654 will keep classrooms busy long after our coffee, but tonight you're just content to meet the posture on paper. Sirens wobble to life somewhere upriver. The tired kind that means, we see you seeing us. You keep your fingers slow. A pollen speck glints in a wax fleck on the oilcloth. You smile because your nerd brain remembers. Beeswax traps seasons. If you lift even a safe microsample later, you might tell which month the seal cooled. Not now. Now you let the page drink, pose, sleep. Oksana circles a line that feels like it wants to argue with the present. The host's courts to hear causes among themselves. She doesn't say it. She underlines it twice. A document doesn't move a checkpoint, but it moves how a kitchen conversation starts. You call that a victory small enough to be honest. You build a simple naming scheme in the folder, Hum 8, Falcon 1, Draft A. Each page gets its own rectangle in the grid of your future. You resist the urge to storyboard drama. Your job is evidence, not trailer. Because you promised one more bedtime pebble, some scribes used onion skin dye when iron gall ink ran low. It ages to a warm brown that makes modern scanners over-romantic. You set neutral profiles and check yourself. Pretty lies are still lies. You want the text to look exactly as tired as it is. By the time the sirens give up, your shoulders have learned the weight of maybe. You don't pretend this draft is decisive. You don't pretend it isn't dangerous in the way all sentences can be when people are ready to listen. You tuck the damp papers back into a cradle that breathes, set 2 fans at low like friendly crickets, and lock the room with a click that lands more like a lullaby than a barricade. On your way out, Mykola asks the question that sounds like weather. Window? You check the chart. 2:40. You say. He nods. Schedules keep poets from drowning. You fall asleep to a comfortable math. Hum, plus tar, plus ring, plus draft, plus clause. No exclamation point. A string of pluses you can follow back in the dark. If the river gives you one more word tomorrow, you'll be ready to copy it and leave the rest asleep. You head for the river with your pack zipped, like a sentence you're not ready to end. The air is so clear, it feels recently washed. Then the day snags. The bridge checkpoint has grown teeth. Same tidy smile as before, Radchenko, but more vests, more radios, the kind of order that thinks it's invisible. He asks where you're going. You say, to the quiet part. He laughs like paper cuts. He wants your media. You want your method. You do the polite dance. Across the water, a gray hull pretends to be a shadow. You don't squint, but you see Sokolov anyway, the shoulders, the balance. Someone talked. Maybe the officer with the hawk sticker. Maybe the quiet alley man who once tipped you to a window and now won't answer the relay frequency you kept as a comfort. Silence is a message, too. You make a choice you can live with if you have to tell it later. No chess tonight. If opportunity winks, you wink back and keep rowing. What you protect is the map, not a grid of digits, but a chain of repeatable cues plus the pages that prove why any of it matters. You split the party like a heist movie that's allergic to drama. Oksana takes the scans and a fresh copy of your Hum 8 notes folded into a library book so ugly no one will steal it. She walks, slow and civilian, to a bus that always runs late, which is why no one watches it. You and Mykola keep the boat and an empty-looking bag that contains exactly nothing you can't recreate. While you wait out the checkpoint's mood, you feed your head a mainstream anchor that fits the setting. In 1667, the Truce of Andrusovo split Ukraine along the Dnipro left bank to Moscow, right bank to the Commonwealth. A river that had been a road became a border you could argue with, only in winter. Some families learned to speak in two directions at once. Historians still debate whether that line was inevitable after 1654, or the avoidable child of bad timing, bad luck, and impatient men in good boots. Either way, the bridge knows how to listen for footsteps. Radchenko waves you through with the kind of blessing that feels like a receipt. You drift under the bridge and think about craft. Quirky fact to keep you gentle. Old timber bridges sometimes carry carpenter's marriage marks. Little Roman numerals chiseled on beams, so the right tenon found the right mortise after a river day. It's a love language for wood. You like the idea enough to borrow it. The right fact needs the right context, or both break. 8 again. The inlet breathes like it remembers you. You practice church manners. Lift, scan, note, return. The hum answers on the second tap, lower than last night, like a fan set to whisper. You put the test candle on stone. The flame leans into a draft shaped like a hallway. Mykola gives the smallest nod in the taxonomy of nods. Then the river throws you the kind of choice that edits a story. A current shift lifts a corner of oilcloth behind the tar board. Not much. Just enough to show weave and wire twist. Every tendon in your forearm leans forward. You could ease it free. You could lift one bundle, scan, return, and row away honest. You could also give a patrol boat a reason to get curious, or teach a rival where to bother next. You think of Ilarion at the Sket. Take only what can be copied. You think of your listeners, breathing slow. You think of how paper can be both proof and magnet. You think of the dead man timer already humming on Oksana's phone across town and the bus seat she chose because it doesn't look like a choice. You do the hard, small thing. You don't pull. You scan what the rock offers without protest: wood grain, tar edge, the faint depression of a falcon in raking light, and close the mouth to its original width with both hands visible, like you're performing a medieval politeness ritual for stone. A drone arrives late and smug. It sweeps the 7th pocket again, convinced it has you solved. You reward it with a decoy. You don't even have to plant your stillness. Mykola hums something that might be a football chant and might be a psalm. It works either way. You slip out with nothing you couldn't write down from memory, and one more fact you couldn't have scripted. A draft line inside the cavity shifts the way breathing shifts across a ribcage. The river is alive to pressure, to your presence, to your self-control. That's not mysticism. That's hydraulics and patience sharing a bench. Back under the bridge, Radchenko's men pretend not to notice you're boring. Boring is your favorite color. You idle beside a pier and watch networks do what they do. One officer talks to one phone, that talks to one drone, that talks to one hull. You imagine how easy it would be to publish a frame, earn a headline, and lose a sight. You picture a classroom 20 years from now trying to teach from screenshots and noise. At the Institute, Oksana has already made 3 neat stacks. Draft A pages breathing under blotter. HUM, 8 photos tagged and dull. Backup drives with labels so plain they're invisible. She taps the dead man to a tighter interval and draws 2 boxes on a whiteboard labeled Evidence and Risk. The seesaw between them is the only plot twist you can respect on a weekday. For your audience, which is really your nervous system, pretending to be a crowd, you lay out the logic in bedtime cadence. The treasure that holds up under questions is the treasure you can share without moving it. The chest can wait for a team with permits, divers, and a museum to argue over what belongs to who. The map, not the paper grid, but the reproducible method plus enough text to matter, needs to live now, in multiple boring places, with names so dull no thief's heart will quicken. You end the day with a kinder quirk. If you hold a page to light and squint just right, you can sometimes see a scribe's pause, a tiny ink pool, where he lifted the quill to hear someone ask a question, or to breathe. You spot one beside the word elect, and feel your chest do the same. Night folds. You inventory the kit by touch. Mic, pad, putty, candle, notebook, patience. The river hums its small, repeatable note through the window screen. You decide to like that it's not a melody yet. Melodies make you hurry. Hums let you sleep. Tomorrow, you'll try to keep everyone as boring as you are. That's the bravest plan you have. You sit with tea and a pencil and ask the question that keeps good people awake. If the treasure isn't coins but grammar, where did it go? Not physically, why did it scatter, sleep, reappear as rumor, and then hum to us from behind a tarred board like a polite cough? I start with the easiest culprit, water. The Dnipro has always been a tidy vandal. Spring lifts, summer lowers, ice remembers. Then the 20th century adds a louder gear. The Dnipro HES dam in the 1932nd drowns rapids with purpose, is blasted in war, then rebuilt vast and calm. Whole voices go under. Islands gain shorelines that belong to maps, not memory. Mainstream point to anchor the thought. The reservoir created anoxic silts, oxygen-starved blankets that rot fish, but preserve wood and linen surprisingly well. Unromantic? Yes. But it's how a tarboard can keep a whisper of a falcon for you to photograph in 2025. You tilt the cup, and I sketch the human culprits. Imagine a convoy in 1650. Samithi Nong fast boats, fast oaths, faster news. They cache not only plate, but lists. Who's owed what? Which villages pay local for a term? Which officers the host elects? Then the decades start throwing elbows. Treaties, truces, a winter that bites fingers off quills. People move. Some take service north. Some slide to the Danube Sich and learn new uniforms. Families split like river channels. A sister marries a clerk. A nephew grows into a quartermaster with gifted ears. Everyone promises not to tell the exact spot. Everyone tells just enough for their branch to find it if things go bad. I give you a thin braid of a story because bedtime needs a face. Let the clerk be Vasil, we've seen the name in margins. Let his sister be Helena, the one who keeps the household lists and sews tarred cloth with hands that don't mind sticky work. Let the priest who hums Troparia be Father Danilo. Vasil and Mikola's forebear run the first cache at 7, then 8, not for greed, but to keep the host's paper backbone from turning into ransom. A year later, politics sours. Helena marries a man stationed on the right bank. The family now lives on 2 maps. When Andrusovo, 1667, splits left and right officially, the oath mutates. Cross only at night. Never lift the chest. Lift documents only. For copying. Then return them. The romance shrinks to a method because methods survive winters that lovers don't need-o. You smile at the softness of it, and I add a dry hinge. Historians still debate whether the host ran central caches by policy or whether dozens of private stashes later braided into legend. Our inlet behaves like policy, countable, repeatable, guarded by boringness, not by bravado. That's my vote, but I keep it in pencil. Floods come, floods go. Then 1775 burns the Sich down to nails. In the smoke, Father Danilo's successor writes a line about light moving where water moves not. That's someone's nephew copying, not stealing, pulling one bundle for a day to settle a pay dispute, returning it before the moon changes. Helena's daughter, call her Oksana, for the pleasure of giving our present Oksana, an ancestor ties the wire on the oilcloth hard enough to outlive 3 arguments and 1 winter fever. She leaves a linen edge sticking just enough to tempt anyone who doesn't belong. Clever. The family teaches its children to resist temptation like a sacrament. Centuries yawn. Then the dam arrives, and the inlet stops being a cove and becomes a breathing seam under a polite amount of water. The hum we hear now could be the cavity half-filled air above, still water below. Hydraulics, not haunting. Our tar smell is probably from repairs done in the 18th century, not a Hollywood seal. The Falcon's depression? A clerk pressing too firm on a hot afternoon. The board? Part hatch, part ledger cover, part doormat for a story to wipe its feet on before coming inside. You ask for the other culprits, politics and love, because frankly they're the same shape in different jackets. Politics is how strangers bargain. Love is how families do. Picture a left-bank nephew in imperial service after 1775, sent back to survey irregular islands. He finds the old inlet by muscle memory and decides not to tell his new captain because not everything needs a tax, and because Helena once showed him how to read a draft line with the back of his hand. He touches the iron ring, feels the boards give, whispers a psalm he barely believes, and leaves nothing changed but the story in his chest. Then he marries someone who thinks the river is a mirror more than a road, and they teach their child both languages. A quirky fact to keep your smile. Beeswax remembers pollen. If one day we lift a legal microsample, we might tell the bundle's season. Imagine proving that the seal was pressed in late July because clover dust still clings in the wax like a summer stuck in a pocket. Not tonight. Just a possibility folded into tomorrow's science. So where did the treasure go? The coins paid wages, bought oats, bribed patrols, and sank one barrel at a time into markets and anniversaries. The people went everywhere a river can carry a boat and a promise. The papers? They did what grammar does when cornered. They hid in plain procedure. A draft clause copied into another draft, carried across a border tucked in a psalter, recited at a village assembly as, "What our fathers agreed," argued over at kitchen tables until the words felt native. The chest behind our board may still hold plate and a ledger, or it may hold proof that the ledger once mattered. Either way, the treasure already moved, into mouths, into habits, into the kind of sentences that change how a neighborhood says we. You want a dot on your mental map though, and I won't be coy. The likely pocket sits just past the 7th ford, in a wind-shadowed inlet, where reflections go velvet, and a contact mic hears a stable hum. The rock lip shows tar enough to matter, and an iron ring that fits the palm. The board bears the Falcon's depression with that crescent nick we've met elsewhere. Inside, weave glints, a suggestion of linen. That's not myth. That's repeatable. What happens next? Permits, divers, museum people with gloves that cost more than our boat. Maybe a controlled lift in a season when the river is in a forgiving mood. Maybe a choice not to lift at all just to publish copies and let the original sleep until the neighborhood is safer. Here's the part I say softly so it sits right. Some treasures should surface as stories, not as loot. Especially the kind that can redraw a memory without moving a rock. If you've read And Quiet Flows the Dawn, you know endings here don't tie bows. They unspool slowly across seasons and fields. Our ending will look like that open, stubborn, kind to time. We'll leave a small, generous space for families whose grandparents taught them to count to 7 and stop at 8 on principle. For now, you inhale the last of the tea. You set your pencil down. You let the hum in the wall fan and the hum in the stone become one sound. When you sleep, the chest doesn't open. The sentence does. You sit at the table with 2 folders, one light and one heavy. The heavy one is for people with gloves and budgets, permits, conservation plans, a proposal for a controlled look when the river is in a kind mood. The light one is for the world images of grain and pitch. The Falcon's faint depression, the method that any patient team could repeat without hurting a stone. You breathe, sign, and let the difference between evidence and address be your boundary. Mikola leans on the doorframe like a lighthouse that forgot to charge rent. Oksana draws a small square on the whiteboard and writes, "Wait," inside it. You both nod. The plan is to publish copies, never coordinates, to share procedure, not X marks the spot, to invite museums, not headlines. The river has survived impatient people before. Tonight, it doesn't have to survive us. You make a sealed envelope because some stories want 1 names of the 3 pockets, the 7, then 8 that works, the contact list if you vanish during a bad window. It goes into a safe that doesn't look heroic. Insurance isn't drama. It's manners. A mainstream point to keep your history muscle honest. After 1654, what Pereyaslav meant slid around with the century. Some texts announce autonomy. Others hem it. Power changed hands. Borders learned new verbs. That's why paper here matters, because definition is a tool, and tools build houses or cages depending on who holds them. Historians still debate whether Khmelnytsky was a liberator who gambled for space, or a broker who invited a longer leash. You don't adjudicate from a boat. You listen where he might have asked someone to tuck away a draft. You carry the light folder to a quiet room and record a voiceover your future self won't hate. You show the hum, the tar, the ring, the depression of a falcon seen only by raking light. You explain the 4 beats lift, scan, note, return until they sound like a lullaby anyone could do right. You leave out directions a thief could use. You put in enough texture that a patient listener can feel the river breathing through the screen. A quirky fact to sweeten the lesson. Lichen grows on granite in patterns you can sometimes date. Old surfaces wear pale rosettes like slow fireworks. If one day the rock lip is lifted for conservation, someone will read the lichen like a wristwatch and tell you how long the seam has been exhaling. Science is a poet that whispers. You like that? Night lands clean. You take the long walk home where the city's lights put their elbows on the river. The checkpoint pretends it isn't watching. You pretend you aren't nervous. A gull saunters across the pavement like it owns maritime law. You grin because even in war, small ridiculous things survive. At the apartment, you lay the light folder next to the fan and let its steady hum rhyme with the rock's everise. You rehearse the story one last time for the people who fall asleep to your voice. If you've read And Quiet Flows the Dawn, you already know the mood. Freedom with calluses, dignity that hates tidy orders. Put that on water, and you get logistics with a spine. Say, stop at 7. And the good answer is 8. Because liberty loves to choose. You confess the part that isn't cinematic. You didn't pull a chest. You didn't spill old coins across a table like a magician with a rental tux. You did something smaller, and if you're lucky, more useful. You copied what could be copied, and you left the rest to sleep. You made the kind of map that teaches gentleness. A map of sounds, breaths, and habits. If a document behind that board grants a word like elect a little more weight in the mouths of people who need it, that's a treasure you can spend without making anyone poorer. You tidy the kit like brushing a child's hair. Mic, pad, putty, candle, notebook, patience, lunch tomorrow. You text Mykola a single word. Window? He writes back the hour and a fish emoji that means he's still himself. Oksana sends a photo of the safe with the envelope inside. Boring as planned. She captions. It's the highest praise she gives. Before sleep, you leave one open question on the nightstand, where you can see it if you wake at 3. How much of this should we name? Secrecy guards sights. Secrecy also cages stories. You suspect the river's answer is the same as the Skeda's. Copy? Then wait. Publish method, not map. Let institutions be brave on your behalf when the season is right. You crack the window. The air smells like tin and wet leaves. Reeds hiss in a voice old enough to ignore passports. Somewhere upriver, a siren winds down, not like an alarm but like a city exhaling. You set your fan to the lowest setting and count to 7 without stopping. At 8, you let your thoughts pull in behind the wind's shadow, where even tired minds can finally moor. If one day you return with divers and gloves and permission, you'll touch iron openly and lift what history is ready to show in daylight. If not, if this is as far as the story wants to go with you, then you still leave it better. With copies in boring places, with discipline for anyone who follows, and with an argument stated softly enough to be heard. Some treasures are sentences, some maps are choirs, some victories are choosing not to grab. You turn off the light and let the room's small hum braid with the river's long one. 2 notes. Same chord. You fall asleep inside it. You are on a slow boat now. The kind that doesn't hurry even when clocks do. The water is wide enough to carry your day without spilling it. The oar rests beside you like a friendly limb. The fan becomes a shoreline you can keep in your pocket. The city's lamps blur and thin. Between one breath and the next, the river loses its edges and becomes the color of sleep. You count not crossings but comforts. 1. The method you can trust even when memory gets shy. 2. The people who share it, quiet, stubborn, kind. 3. The way a rock says yes without speaking, only by holding a note. 4. The word you copied today, the one that will still mean itself when you wake. 5. A promise small enough to keep. 6. The patience you didn't know you owned until the river loaned it to you. 7. And you don't stop. You drift one pocket farther, to the place where reflection goes velvet, and names aren't needed. Somewhere, a reed warbler turns into a comma, and the sentence keeps going without you. Granite dreams in lichen. Paper dries the way laundry does on a good line without hurry, without witnesses. The falcon's faint oval closes its eye again. You feel lighter, not because you let go of anything, but because you chose not to pick it up. If you wake in the dark, the map is simple. Listen for the low hum, the one your room and the river share. Let it set your pace. Let it ask nothing clever of you. You are part of the quiet now, not outside it. When morning remembers you, you will still have the dot on the map and the sentence that knows where it belongs. Sleep. The water knows your weight. The shore can wait its turn.